Gee, model-wise, working over on Star Trek, I got to do a lot of detail, and it was sort of prickly detail back then. I look at stuff now, I go, oh, that's sort of too model kit bashing, but at the time it was, I liked it. It was fun and everything. Because of sort of the bigger model shops, the bigger places, it was unusual for one person to build a model from start to finish. Usually everybody would, my strong suit was detail and paint, and I would also wire lights and so forth. So it was almost like an assembly line. Somebody would make the basic shape, and sometimes that person would prefer making the shape. They'd hand it off to the mold maker. The mold maker would make a casting, maybe a fiberglass casting. And that was one of the fun part, was that you could sort of see what somebody else was doing to your work or adding to it, and it always was a great collective group of people in the model shops that worked together really extremely well. And a lot of times we would have to, let's say we'd be under the gun and we had to deliver something in a very tight time period. Everybody really stuck together and made it happen. And it was always a very collaborative sort of effort, because you knew that you had X amount of hours sometimes to finish something, so I had to get on the stage by the morning, and everyone would talk to each other. You have this much time to do this part, you have that much time to do that part, and so on and so forth. And so the last guy at the end of the chain was always the painter.
The interior of Virgil in Star Trek the Motion Picture was really hard to build. For one thing, it was very amorphous in the designs. We had a lot of conceptual art we were working from, but you're just looking at big blobs of color and light and thinking, well, how is that going to work? And we were very fortunate that Jein was the one who was supervising this, along with people like Bob Short and Nick Selden, and they were very clever in how they came up with capturing a lot of that sort of weird, amorphous, bizarre shape in the artwork and rendering it into three-dimensional detail. What was oddest about that in some respects was that we ended up detailing it in some fairly traditional manners, as model makers tend to do. And then, of course, because it was just big blobs of light and color, they ended up shooting it very darkly, and none of that showed up anyways. But you get used to that as a model maker.
Lisa was amazing in that I think everybody recognizes she's the only person who could thread the fiber optics with both hands at the same time.
And the work itself, since it was all brand new for me, each thing I did was kind of personally like a little groundbreaking triumph. And I'm also the proudest, and I've gotten the most mileage out of the Enterprise. There was another painter who was working on the Enterprise before I came onto the project, named Paul Olson. And Paul had initially come up with the concept of the pearl stuff, or maybe the director did, but Paul was an airbrush artist in the old sense of the term. He did a lot of chrome robot type stuff and those flashy logo airbrush work that was done back in the 70s and 80s. So Paul did a lot of groundwork on the Enterprise, and then for some reason I think he moved into the art department and began doing other stuff, and that sort of left us in the model shop then to assume the maintenance of all the models and all the stuff on stage. We showed up for work on Monday, and something had happened, I think, to an air conditioner, and it dripped water on the top of the Enterprise for the whole weekend and warped the top of it, and that was another time that we ended up pulling 24-hour days probably, a long time to get this thing ready to shoot, because it was right in the middle of the schedule, and this is like, this $1 million model was for all intents and purposes wrecked. So I remember Mark had to completely remake the whole the control room on the top of the disc was made out of wood and primed and painted, and so it had warped and just popped off. So it had, I think it was remade with plastics some kind. So number one, this wouldn't happen again, and number two, it was the quickest thing to use, I think. But I do recall that we spent a whole weekend getting this thing ready. Dry dock just hung from wires in the ceiling, but the Enterprise was on a motion control rig so it could move out and fly away.
And I had found, I'd heard about the Enterprise being shot. I'm a Star Trek fan, what can I say? And I called somebody and got the address to EEG in Marina Del Rey, because I'm pointing this way, because I was at Apogee in the Valley and Marina was down there. So I went there sort of after hours, and they let me in, and the Enterprise was in the dry dock. And although the stage lights weren't on, it was, it was just the house lights, as they call them, just the regular lights. And I looked at this model, and it was just beautiful. I mean, I was just studying this thing because it was just phenomenal. And it had Ron's paint job on it, the pearlescent thing. And I was closing my eye and sort of running my eye along, the bottom, wondering what did they do to make this sort of glisten? And I had no idea at the time what he had done. I found out years later what he had used.
When I was at Magicam, the first thing I did was an all-nighter. Like the first day I worked, it was an all-nighter finishing the Klingon, where I helped the crew on that. Then I was the key guy on the little work bee, the little yellow work bee. Somebody else made the little container train rather, that the work bee towed. But I made the little work bee and its little arms, and I guess somebody else made the arms. Then the Space Office complex that orbited adjacent to the dry dock. That was my baby too. But we all worked on everything really, and there was a lot of work that had been done in the framing of the Space Office complex by Lee Edelman, the machinist at Magicam. But I did a lot of the plaster spin work for the vacuum forming of the parts of the Space Office complex, and then fabrication of the work bee and stuff like that. All the design work came out of Abel, so it was Richard Taylor and Andy Probert did most of the design work. I had a number of shocks personally, trying to assemble the 18-inch Enterprise model that went to Apogee finally. But it had a little neon core in the middle of it, and I was trying to get the damn electrodes in, and I had to have it live while I was doing it so I'd make sure that it wouldn't die, or I'd know because I was going to glue the model together with the neon live inside it. I shocked myself probably 20 times. I had a little burn all over my fingertips on that thing, trying to get that thing together.
We went 3 months, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 3 months doing Beeger, shooting at it down the street from Apogee. Yeah, a lot of work.
It was 2 crews. There was the 12-hour-a-day day crew, and there was the 12-hour-a-night crew. It was pretty nonstop. And we had smoke, and we had neon, and we had strobes, and we had lasers, a 20-watt laser, way back behind the model, bouncing a light off of a little tiny spinning mirror affair. Smoke coming down through ducts like this, drifting down, and the laser was making a cone of light toward camera like this big cone of green light. And the smoke, as it hit that cone of light, would be illuminated by the laser. So you get these flowing tendrils like a foreshortened tube of gaseous, vaporous smoke over the top of the V'ger, like the V'ger was shrouded with this stuff. We were running 8 or 9 f-stops of smoke in that room, and there was, of course, a lot of black duvetine hanging everywhere. And it got so thick, soaked into the duvetine, that sometimes at night, when temperature and humidity were just right, they would get these little, like St. Elmo's fire, just creeping up through the duvetine. They weren't really fire, they were just some kind of luminous discharge from all this oil that had soaked into the duvetine. It never turned into something where you had to stop everything and grab a fire extinguisher and put it out, but it was just like, what was that? Did you see that? And it was like swamp gas or something, and it just kind of happened from time to time. The other thing that happened, there was so much crud on the floor and so much of the vapors gathering down there, people were starting to get jungle rot between their toes from the fact that their sneakers were just saturated with this oil. This was back in the days when you were putting oil into a maid well. We had maid wells all over the room that were automated, reading off of densitometers like what they did on Close Encounters. So that when the level started to drop, then the maid wells would automatically come on. So you literally couldn't see your hand in front of your face during some of those sessions. And these were long, like 90-second exposures, with the camera just crawling along. Actually, it was crawling above the set with a snorkel lens looking down close to it. Very much like Close Encounters. I don't know whether they had the St. Elmo's fire or not, but we certainly did. It was spooky. In fact, it kind of blew me away because the first week I was there, come Friday, composites on the feature were up, and it's VistaVision. It's a big screen. It's a little room with a big screen, and JBL voice of the theater speakers on either side, and Dykstra puts on this toccata and fugue in G minor on the organ at top volume with this beautiful, slow, gorgeous, saturated feature footage. And we're all laying on the floor, just this stuff is just washing over us like a big wave. I was impressed. I felt suddenly very, very happy to be working at Apogee. And I felt, little did I know, that this was really going to be something huge.
For Epsilon 9, when it gets destroyed by V'ger, they used a Tesla coil. And that's where the cage came in. They were shooting all the elements for that. And then when that ship got destroyed, it was like a wave going over the ship. And it was a Tesla coil, sparks and everything that did that. But they shot the Tesla coil elements there too.
We had a giant Tesla coil, and we had a model Klingon wrapped with crinkled up aluminum foil, scanning the thing with a laser for one series of exposures, and then zapping it with lightning from the Tesla coil for other exposures. So the Tesla coil was kind of hairy too. There were people in the neighborhood who, I'm sure their television reception was badly messed up. They eventually had to build a Faraday cage around that whole setup with chicken wire and 2x4s because it was just a little too staticky and crazy for words. That was, of course, before cell phones. I'm sure it would have messed up everybody's cell phones, that much energy floating around. But it was a lot of fun to see that lightning.
The hexagon bridge, that was a kind of thing, nowadays they would do that all with CGI, but we were doing that with little forced perspective hexagon blocks, and we had cast up thousands of these things. And they were just cast basically in plaster. They were very simple, but we had to cast them in a variety of different scales because this thing needed to look like it went on forever. And it was the kind of thing where we had cast the blocks and then you just kind of put them together in a giant jigsaw puzzle. So we had one big room at the facility that was just the hexagon bridge room, and I think there were like two of us who would just spend a day going in there and arranging the little blocks. So it looked like they went off in order. And
Magicam had originally had the contract to do all the visual effects for the TV movie, but when they turned it into a feature film, they kept the contract for the model work, but Bob Abel was hired to do the visual effects. Bob Abel and Associates was a very fashionable commercial and high-end commercial house at the time and had not done feature film work. So after about 8 months at Magicam, I actually resigned and was going to go back into industrial design. I actually had a contract to go back into industrial design. And the Abel model shop run by Dick Singleton caught wind of the fact that I was planning to leave Magicam, so they felt it was okay to go after me and try to recruit me into their model crew to look after the models after they'd been turned over by Magicam. And so I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose talking to these guys. And so I went over there and talked to them and liked everybody. And they offered me a job. I asked for twice as much money as I had been making at Magicam. Figured, well, if I'm going to do this and be in this industry, I'm going to just go for it. And they said yes. And I was shocked. And then, after they hired me and they sort of brought me in and said, well, at that rate, you're going to have to, take on a bit of a leadership role here. But it was still Dick Singleton's shop. I said, okay.
And I essentially learned on the job. I knew how to use an airbrush, but I'd never used the paints that I was using. I'd never painted anything at all like a model like the Enterprise or any other models for that matter. We all did a really good job, I think. The Enterprise to this day still holds up as one of the premier models to ever come out of Hollywood movie making as a physical model, I think.
in order to be hired, I was put into the animation union because they take anybody in those days. They would take anyone. So I was not an animator. I had never been trained for a minute in animation. But my paperwork said I was a scene planner, which would allow me to handle models and do drawings and sort of cross over those worlds, which proved to be very convenient later. So the job got so panicked later after Entertainment Effects Group, Doug Trumbull's company, took on the project, that they just started throwing tasks at people. They would look down the list, Les Ekker, Animation Union, good. They literally ran into my office, threw down some prints of scenes and said, here, animate this sequence, and ran out. And later I met with my visual effects supervisor, Robert Swarth, on the project, and he told me essentially how to do that kind of animation, which I'd never heard of before. It was called slot mask animation. And it really consisted of a very simple technique. You simply draw some lines of black ink on a white card, have a film negative made of it, so now you have clear lines on a black carrier, and you lay them on top of each other and you slide them across a light source, and where they intersect you have a dot of light that moves. So that motion creates the animation, and so I figured out how to do that for the ending sequence and how to get it shot on the Oxberry, and they optically composited it into the scene, and that's the end of the movie.
The newly sort of formed visual effects shops, first of all, they were staffed by people like John Dykstra, Bob Shepard, Wayne Smith. They were all out of Long Beach State or Art Center or other design programs like that. And after about 8 months or so working on Star Trek, I thought, this business is crazy and I don't understand it. And these people aren't here to make something beautiful. They're not making art. They're, it's a business. And it took me a long time to sort of understand that from the proper perspective, the sort of the relationship between art and business. In the meantime, I had a boss that was shouting at me to get stuff done that I didn't think was really done, and to walk away from it and just ship it out the door. And I thought, this could never be on camera, and didn't understand that he knew that too, but that was the way it was going to go down.
It was always strange to me to reach the end of a project, and you would go in the next day, either to finish up some tiny part or even collect your paycheck or something, and there would be a crew in there sledgehammering everything. I remember the first time I saw that, I said, "Oh, what is this? Why can't we keep it? If they're just going to do that." And they said, "No, the studio owns it, and they don't want anyone else to have it, so this is what they do with it." And yeah, that was kind of heartbreaking to watch. Of course, we all did steal little pieces. They actually would try to bar us from the area where they were doing this, but everyone would wait until they'd turn their back and sneak in and grab something.
Around the time of Star Trek and Buck Rogers, we were kind of being seduced by the technology. We were getting so enthralled with high tech, and I encountered the same thing at Apogee working on Star Trek, when like the money valve was wide open and people were buying all this elaborate equipment and technologizing every step of the way, everything that we did. Just dump some money on it, buy some gizmos, and we'll get it. But as I said, you have to balance that with the necessities of filmmaking. So that kind of stuck in my mind. Never let the tech get any higher than it needs to be. Get the shot, and then move on. Don't get so enthralled with the process that you lose sight of the product.
High budget was like the money tree at Star Trek The Motion Pictures. Like, I don't care how much money you spend, just get it done by December 7th. Like, okay.
We eventually got it to where the means led logically to the end, but it took a little while, and there was a lot of time and money wasted as we all learned what we were doing and why, So it was a lot of fun. I think if we weren't so young and so enthusiastic and so much in love with the idea of doing models for science fiction, it probably would have been more disastrous than it was. But basically, I think if you talk to Lauren or any of these people that got in around the same time, it was mainly fun. It was a good way to learn things and earn money at the same time.